So I just finished Directive 8020, the latest game from Supermassive, who you will probably know from Until Dawn. I would say that was their breakout hit in 2015, and for me personally, that was definitely their title that caught my eye, and it's still the title that I hold in the highest regard from them. You know, when I think back to early days getting the PlayStation 4, and that was one of the first titles I played on the PlayStation 4, and I was just blown away by the tech. I mean, I loved everything about that game. I loved the story. I thought the characters were intriguing. It's just Until Dawn is one of those games I like to revisit because I like being in that world around those characters so much. And even the Quarry from what was that 2023, the one that was published by 2K. Whenever Supermassive has partners that can really fund the shit out of some ambitious projects, they can do some great work. I think the Quarry and Until Dawn are great narrative driven adventure games. Unfortunately, everything in the Dark Pictures universe has been a considerable step down in terms of quality when you compare it to Until Dawn and The Quarry. And like with Directive 8020, I was kind of hoping that they were going to, because I believe they separated from Bandai Namco and they were trying to do their own thing and self publish. And I was like, okay, maybe are they taking a big bet here? Are they going to take a big swing here and try to get back to that level of quality that we knew from them in the past? And in some ways, there are considerable leaps forward from a technological aspect with Directive 8020, which we'll get into, but it's still a Dark Pictures game. And that's something that needs to be hammered home. They don't market it as such. Whenever you look at the box art, nowhere on that does it say a Dark Pictures game, but it is a Dark Pictures game in the Dark Pictures universe, and that comes with you should set your expectations there. Don't go in expecting Until Dawn. Don't go in expecting The Quarry. Go in expecting another Dark Pictures game, but a better Dark Pictures game. Better than most. I would still maybe say House of Ashes is higher in my overall ranking. Maybe I'll do an overall ranking for the Supermassive franchise or for Supermassive developed games, but it's probably in that same territory with House of Ashes. And to be clear, like, I don't think that either of those games are bad games whatsoever. I don't think that most of the Dark Pictures universe games are technically bad. I just think whenever you go in expecting a 6 or a 7, and if you get a 7.5 or an 8, you'll be delighted. And I think that that is where this falls into that range. Not bad, just honestly, it's kind of boring. And I think Directive 8020 suffers from being boring more so than maybe any of their other games, even within the Dark Pictures universe, especially early on. Like, it takes a while. Directive 8020 has some pacing issues. The back end of that game I find much more compelling than a lot of the other Supermassive titles. But early on, I was like, damn, I don't like these characters all that much. I don't really find anything that you're setting up to be engaging whatsoever. But I also think that some of that is just purely a preference thing, where whenever I think Supermassive does teen, campy, thriller, horror, slasher shit so well. This is very serious. And it is a kind of tonal whiplash in comparison to something like The Quarry or Until Dawn. And it maybe kind of does, in some ways, lean into that House of Ashes DNA, where House of Ashes is pretty fucking serious as well. And, like, I don't mind that. I just think that Supermassive kind of struggles with that tone of really making you buy in to a super serious story early on. But they to be fair, they did get me. By the end of the game, I was very compelled to see where the story would end up by the end of the experience. But for anybody who might be new to the channel, how I do these reviews here is I go through and I score it out based on gut checks, so like reviewer's tilt, personal preference, story, gameplay, tech, and art, and then I divide those 4 scores up by 4 and get the final score. So gut check is what we're going to start off with here first, and I would say overall, once again, I think it falls into that 7 out of 10 camp that most of the other Dark Pictures games fall into. slightly higher. I think you can get down to some 6 out of 10 territory with something like a Man of Medan. This is better than that, but this is definitely not hitting that high bar of Until Dawn or anything really close. But let's begin talking about the story real quick, because I think that this is one of the areas where, like, it's a pretty heavy story, and it's much heavier than, as we were talking about, like the campy teen horror stuff that you expect from Supermassive, and they struggle at times with that. But the initial setup is that you're playing this rotating cast of characters that you're controlling throughout the experience, and you are on this space station, this spaceship, and you are trying to find a new home for humanity as Earth is dying. And the very early setup for the game, like when you first are aware that there's a threat on board your ship, is that you are playing as a character named Carter and Sims, and you're having back and forth banter, you're talking over the comms, and y'all both hear this massive thud, this massive noise in the distance. So you go and you're checking to see if there's any damage to the ship, and you notice there's this big, just massive hole in the side of the ship. So you investigate it, and you're like, okay, well, there's this gooey substance. What exactly is this? You end up trying to brush it off as, it's probably just coolant residue. It's nothing more than that. And you repair the ship, you do your job, and you go back to life as usual. But as you are walking away, you see what is this quote unquote coolant residue. You see it start to mutate, and you see it start to grow, and like the pipe that it is latched onto, it starts spreading throughout that pipe. So you're like, oh, okay. And this is you, the player, who sees this, not the characters in the game. They are walking away, and then the camera cuts to that, and you're just like, oh shit, okay, this thing is alive. This thing is mutating and beginning to fucking spread throughout this ship. And that's really where the story begins. And once again, as we were talking about with the pacing issues, it still takes a couple hours from that point for the story to really kick off, and for you to begin, or at least for me to begin, getting really invested in what was going on. But I do like when they start diving into the mutation and to this organism, whatever the hell it may be, the discovery process of that, I did find intriguing. And not to go too deep into any spoiler territory here, this is all fairly early shit that we're discussing in the game, but I do like how this mutation, it almost feels more like a possession system than an infection. Like, it doesn't seem that it is taking hold of people whenever they become quote unquote infected with it as if it was a disease. It almost, in a way, it bridges that gap where it's obviously, we're talking about science fiction, which usually doesn't deal too much in the spiritual realm, but this feels a little bit more spiritual in that respect. Like, the whole idea of possessing these different people that are coming in contact with the disease, or with the spread of this mutation, like, that mutation potentially having the ability to manipulate the person and possess the person and control them and make them behave appropriately for the situation depending on what is needed in the moment. But then there also is a lot of the leaning into the science side of the science fiction. You do see a lot of it kind of feels like the infancy stages of the T virus or the G virus, or whatever Resident Evil virus you want to discuss here, where it's like, okay, we need to conduct experiments on this thing, and we need to figure out what exactly are we going to do with this thing. Like, okay, do we need to apply additional hydrogen pressure to it? And if we combine that with a temperature of whatever degrees Fahrenheit, what is the end result here? And then, like, you just get into all of the experimentation phases with this virus that I find really intriguing. I find it really intriguing to just look at the very early embryonic phase of what the fuck this thing is going to become. But unfortunately, I do think that those elements, specifically regarding this mutation, are the most intriguing parts of the story. And that's a problem with supermassive games because I think the best supermassive games, the thing you like the most is typically the characters. The characters drive the story for Until Dawn and for the Quarry. And I just don't think that's the case for Directive 8020. And I think that is why it is probably going to land in that camp of just another Dark Pictures game that I don't really remember. Like, I don't really think back to. I think back to some of the characters from House of Ashes, but I really don't think back to many of the characters from any of the other games in this universe. And I don't think I'm going to really think back to this cast of characters from Directive 8020 either. And like, even when talking about moments, like there's one really cool jump scare moment that I won't spoil. I'm trying to be as cautious as possible with spoilers lately. I got in trouble when I did my Resident Evil 9 review. People were mad at me for showing some later game footage and talking about some mechanical spoilers. So I'm trying my best to dance around anything that could be even slightly viewed as a spoiler for these games, especially these narrative driven games. And I understand that, like, I'm very spoiler sensitive as well. So I'm trying to be as cautious as possible here. But let's just say there is a really fucking cool jump scare that happens pretty early on in Directive 8020 that, like, is one of my favorite jump scares from this franchise, or really from Supermassive's entire catalog. And they're pretty damn good with their jump scares. I don't think they overutilize them. Although I'm in that weird camp in regards to jump scares where, like, I don't really mind overuse of jump scares because I'm not going to get scared by monsters. And the even the psychological horror shit that kind of seeps into your mind and makes you contemplate life and death and this, that, and the other. And you think about your childhood and all the traumas. And, like, obviously I'm thinking about a Silent Hill 2 while talking about all this. It's like, I appreciate it. I do think that that's one of the best written horror games of all time, but it's not one that seeps in and just horrifies me on an internal level. Like, I'm not up at night with dread after playing Silent Hill. And to be fair, a lot of this is just because I'm completely desensitized to the genre entirely. So for me, a cheap jump scare, I'm like, oh fuck, it got me. And I kind of get excited to feel some of those feelings again, which is, kind of a morbid thing to admit. But yeah, man, overall the characters just, they don't really land with me. And I don't know, maybe it's, I don't know if this was a voice culture or if this was bad direction or if this was just bad acting, but some of the line delivery in Directive 8020 was horrendous, man. There's one character, Stafford, in the game, delivers a top tier performance. His voice is just like, that is a very, very memorable voice. So that helps. But there are some bad performances in Directive 8020. And once again, like, this is something where you really have no idea where to place the blame. It could be the voice actor's fault. It could be the director's fault. I don't know. I just know there are some rough performances in Directive 8020. And that's kind of important for a game like this that is damn near entirely dependent upon the line delivery, on you connecting with characters, on the writing being solid. And then by and large, I don't think the writing is bad. Like, I don't even think it's one of the, they've had some cringy kind of just corny character writing in the past with Supermassive games, but this isn't that. I don't think any of these characters are corny or cringy or, the millennial sort of verbiage. Like, it's none of that. It's just not well acted from a motion capture standpoint, from a, like, all of that shit is pretty solid. And we'll get into that when we start talking about the tech in a little bit, but like, that's really good by and large. You do feel the emotions of these characters and that's solid. But from a voice acting perspective, there was just some disconnect here for certain characters in this cast. I'm not going to call out the individual person because that feels really shitty, but there's one individual cast member in this game where I'm like, dude, what happened here? This is like damn near Resident Evil 1 territory of just completely flat delivery.
But just take a look at this. It's forest. Oh my God.
It's awful.
And those of you who know me and who have been around the channel for a while, you will know that I have a deep disdain for flashback and flash forward sequences, and Directive 8020 is a frequent abuser of both. And like, listen, it's not the end of the world. This is totally a preference thing more so than any like objective. Like, I can't say that flashbacks or flash forward sequences are objectively bad. I have a really tough time, and I once again, I talk about this on the channel all the time as well. Like, I never believe that I have the end all be all opinion. I want to hear other people's opinion, and if it differs from mine, that's like, I'm more interested in that than anything. I want to hear what you felt was compelling about the flashbacks and flash forward sequences. So let me know in the comments. But it's just like, in my opinion, it feels so disjointed and disconnected. Like, I have a hard time believing that people who even do like that style of storytelling, I would have a hard time seeing even those people connect with it, because it is just so disconnected at times, where this is a very odd scenario where it's like you're not flashing too far back or too far forward. And so these characters all look the same, and they're often in similar scenarios. So my brain is constantly going, okay, well, why didn't we just let this play out naturally? Why didn't everything just occur in sequence appropriately so that we could eventually lead to this moment? It's one of those odd scenarios where I, at times, felt like the game was kind of spoiling itself. And I don't know why. I understand that they tried to... they try to breadcrumb you in the wrong direction, because that's, you know, when you're choosing your own path in a story driven experience like that, it is fun to make the wrong decision and be like, oh, I should have saw that coming. But I don't really feel like even that was accomplished correctly, because I feel like with the telegraphing that was being done, it almost had the opposite effect, where it was kind of warning me that, once again, I don't want to start spoiling shit, but it was like, I might not have thought a layer deeper in the moment if I wasn't warned that I might need to think a layer deeper. And in a game like this, where they built in reverse mechanics, where if you make a bad decision, you can just reverse it and make the opposite decision. And like, in a game where that is built into it, the entire idea of breadcrumbing in general just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But once again, that's a personal thing. I just don't really understand that direction. I don't understand the use of flashback and flash forward scenes in most movies, games, stories in general, but I especially don't understand it in Directive 8020. But yeah, man, overall, to score the story real quick, I think it's a problem if I spent that much time talking about the disease and the mutation and all of that shit more so than anything about characters or memorable moments with these characters. The one memorable moment from the game for me will be the jump scare. I don't think there's any character moments that'll really stick with me at all. There's some stuff later in the game that I won't spoil, but even that's not a character moment, and these are very character-driven experiences. So Dude, I think I'm going to have to go 6 out of 10 on the story. Like, it's serviceable, it's solid, but it just doesn't connect. At least, once again, not for me personally. This story just did not connect for me personally. So yeah, overall, I'm going to drop it down to a 6 out of 10 for the story review. But let's talk about the area of the game that I was kind of impressed with, surprised by, and that's the gameplay. I think that this is... listen, here's what I'll say about the gameplay for Directive 8020. It's not there yet at all, but it's getting closer. And whenever I am thinking about, you know, when I'm reviewing these games and I'm thinking about the gameplay for something like a mixtape or the gameplay for something like Directive 8020, I'm thinking about the gameplay compared to other games in this genre. And so for other games in the choose your own adventure genre, Directive 8020 is very fucking ambitious. And you could maybe even argue that too much focus, too much attention was put into the gameplay department for Directive 8020, and that came at the expense of, character writing, storytelling. The choose your own adventure part of the adventure genre was like, it's still there. You still do make decisions, and some of those decisions matter, and like they have the branching. It shows you the branching effect that you see like in Detroit Become Human. That's all fine and dandy, but it just doesn't feel as much like a typical choose your own adventure game as much as it does kind of a stealth game. Directive 8020 is very, very stealth heavy, and I don't know if that was a good decision for most people, but I'm one of those weirdos who I just really like stealth games. You give me an Eric's Home Stolen Dream, and yes, I understand you can look at the completion percentage for that game, and most people absolutely do not finish Eric's Home A Stolen Dream. Like, that game is ridiculously punishing. Sometimes it feels punishing for no reason, but I am a sucker for a really good stealth driven experience. But at the same time, the numbers are obvious, and they're available, and they're out there. When you look at a game like Origami and the studio being shut down after the release of Origami 2, or that title, what was the the Shadow Gambit game that came out from the Desperados team, that studio is now completely shut down as well. So it's obvious people don't want purely stealth driven experiences, and thankfully for Directive 8020, this is not a purely stealth driven experience. But I could understand people looking at how much stealth is in this game. I don't think they necessarily broadcasted this, or I don't think they wanted to publicize this and put it in all the trailers, that this is a very stealth dominant experience, but there's a whole hell of a lot of stealth in Directive 8020. And so I guess either consider that a warning or an invite, however you feel about it. If you are a stealth fan, then you might end up really vibing with this. Once again, keep in mind it's not Metal Gear Solid 5 stealth mechanics or anything like that, but I was somewhat impressed by the level of, for one, it's not just the stealth experience in terms of like, yeah, sure, you can crouch at any time and you can go into vents and you can hide, but there's also an added layer of like new puzzle solving mechanics baked in here. And it's another thing where it's not the most expansive or in-depth, but you have this device. It's like this electronic prod thing, and you are sticking it into, locked sockets, and you're essentially picking a lock by lining up these nodes. And it's, if you line up the orange node properly with the, orange lock that you're trying to pick, everything turns orange and you immediately unlock the door in one motion. But if you don't do that, there's a bunch of these gray nodes, and if you stack those up and you don't fail, you can unlock the door by doing that like 3 or 4 times consecutively. But the dope thing is that this is often taking place while you are being stalked by some big monstrosity, and you are having to make sure that motherfucker, because they can absolutely strike you while you're trying to unlock a door. It's not the Resident Evil thing where, okay, the monster's an inch behind me, but I'm going into this canned animation where I'm going to unlock the door and walk through it, and the monster can't get me even though he's an inch behind me. Like, at any time, this fucking monster can rip your damn head off. And I should be clear there, when I say anytime, I mean anytime that you're in this arena with the monster, who is, you're aware of their presence and they're roaming around and you're having to stealthily get to your objective. They're not just like roaming around as you're talking to your different companions and making decisions and shit like that. That would be beyond fucking annoying. But in those moments where the stealth sequence is activated, or whatever the hell you want to call it, like you have to be aware of that monster's presence and where they are at all times. And it's not like an instant fail state. If the monster comes up and approaches you one time, you have the ability in that first time to perform a QTE that will buy you some separation so you can run away and hide, and the monster will lose track of you. But over time, like, I think if you get approached twice, if the monster catches you the second time, or at least for me, and I was just playing on the normal difficulty, and I think that's something that they added for the first time with, I could be wrong, but I think Directive 8020 is the first game where they have multiple different difficulty settings, and there's like a permadeath option as well if you want to toggle that on, and just every choice that you make, you won't be able to rewind or replay anything. You'll have to go back and restart the game over entirely to make new decisions. But yeah, on the normal difficulty, you can hit the QTE, get away from the monster the first time, but on the second time, he just bashes my damn skull in, immediately killing me. And later in the game, it's cool as well when you're like having to run away from that monster, you're having to hide from it, but you're also having to reroute different wiring systems and connect different wires to different doors to unlock different doors for you to go through. And in the meantime, you're doing the little hacking mini game to unlock doors as well, and you're having to find these like power module things that you're inserting into the door to generate power so that you can go through it. And so they're stacking like different levels of strategy, and usually you're doing only one thing at a time, but towards the back end they start stacking like 3 or 4 of these things that you're having to figure out at a time. And once again, it's not brain busting puzzle solving, but it's just a few things for you to think about on the fly. And then they incorporate your Until Dawn like QTEs where it's the pulse pounding and making sure you tap the shit out of circle to fill the bar to get away from the enemy. And then right after tapping circle, they put circle back on the screen, but this time you're not supposed to tap it, you're just supposed to press it. And so it's trying to fuck with your brain a little bit, and you're not sure, oh, should I tap it real fast? Should I just press it? And it's doing the QTE thing. Let me dodge to the left. Let me dodge to the right. It's nothing new, but I don't know, man. I love having a somewhat, not necessarily challenging, but one of those QTEs where you got to sit up in your chair a little bit when you're lounging and then shit starts really popping off and you actually have to sit up and pay attention a little bit. Like, that's nice. In my opinion, it feels like they are building to their magnum opus. It feels like they are building to the game where it's a stealth driven third person shooter or third person action game with decision making capabilities baked into it. I don't understand why they would be leaning so heavily into a gameplay centric experience, because they did that with the casting of Frank Stone. They did that with The Devil in Me. And The Devil in Me, they had like kind of inventory slots a la Resident Evil, leaning a little bit more in that direction in typical survival horror games. And so they're doing all of this, experimenting with all of this, and evolving their gameplay formula so much. It feels to me that they understand the narrative, they understand the branching, the cause and effect, the having choices that actually matter, which, how much do they matter? In my game experience, I won't spoil anything, but I did end up in a scenario that I did not like. Like, I don't think I ended with the quote unquote good ending. And these games are typically decent about giving you, at the very least, a variety of different endings for you to see. And I'm not saying the moment to moment, the decision that you make 20 minutes in ends up affecting the decision that you made 45 minutes in. It's not necessarily that in depth, but the endings are fairly varied in my opinion. And so to me, it really does feel like they are building to that game where you see the trailer debut at Summer Game Fest and it cuts to some Leon looking motherfucker shooting a dude in the head. And then, towards the end of the trailer, you're making a decision to save or sacrifice someone. And I think that alone, where if they showed real raw gameplay for their next game and you see legit shooting or some legit action taking place, and then it's the decision making being thrown in there, that would feel like, okay, all of this is making sense. It's making sense while they're slowly stacking these mechanics. One game after another, having the inventory management into the stealth, into like, I got to imagine they're going somewhere with this. And I've talked about this ad nauseum as well. I apologize, but it's like, I do think we need a space where it's not just 200-hour RPGs where you're given choice and consequence. Like if you want a gameplay experience with choice and consequence for your narrative branching paths, like you're typically only finding that in these massive RPGs. It really would be great to play a game where you have an actual, third person shooter, third person action adventure game, and you also can make decisions that shape the ending or shape some of the moments throughout your journey. So if that's what they're building towards, I am fully on board if they're going there. If not, that's the problem, because like I'm sitting here and I'm trying to review Directive 8020, and just looking at this game in a silo, it makes the conversation a little bit harder, because individually I don't necessarily think that the sacrifice was worth it. I would have rather had a better choose your own adventure game from Supermassive than a mediocre stealth game. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a great stealth game. There's no real mechanics other than crouching. And like I said, I dig the puzzle solving. I dig the hacking systems, and some of like, I dig some of that stuff. But at the sacrifice of the level that I know Supermassive can reach whenever you're talking about your Until Dawns and your Corys, and maybe they don't have that level within them unless they receive funding from a 2K or from a PlayStation. But it's just, when I step away from it, I'm like, I don't think that even if you could reach 70% of that and you had to sacrifice the stealth, like I would still say that that was probably worth it to get rid of the stealth, to get rid of some of those puzzle solving aspects and all of that, to create a better story, to get people on board, because that's what people are going to these games for. Now, once again, if I do see that trailer, if I see that trailer debut at Summer Game Fest or the Game Awards or whenever the hell that trailer debuts, and I'm seeing a character shooting a motherfucker or something, I'm like, okay, now I see why they were baking in these stealth mechanics and having some semblance of what looks like it could lean into cover shooting at some point. It's like, okay, I see where they're going with all of this, and they're really trying to create their magnum opus. But the fact that they have to release a new game every single year to keep their studio afloat, okay, they're building this slowly. I would begin to understand that then, but right now it's like, I don't quite get it. But once again, when talking about analyzing the gameplay experience and looking at it against and comparing it against other adventure games, like it is better in the gameplay department than most other adventure games, but that doesn't make it a better overall adventure game than most other adventure games, if you get what I'm saying. So gameplay wise, I would say like a 7 out of 10 or so. It's kind of fun to run around and try to hide from the monsters and solve the puzzles, and like that shit's fun. All right, but let's talk about the tech and the art real quick, and then we will wrap up this review. I think that this is a pretty solid step forward for Supermassive in the on a technical front. It's definitely a solid step forward for them. It's their first time using Unreal Engine 5 in the Dark Pictures universe, and like they used it for the Dead by Daylight, the casting of Frank Stone. They used Unreal Engine 5, but it feels like they really got their feet under them now, understanding this engine. And once again, it's like most Unreal Engine 5 games that we talk about, you're going to run into issues. And I was playing on PlayStation 5 Pro, and I still had stuttering issues and frame rates dropping from time to time. And there were some weird issues where the background, they blur the background to try to get an up close on the character's face so you can see all of the emoting that's taking place and the lifelike facial features. And it's solid. Really solid motion capture, and the quality of the character design in general, I think, is pretty good. But there are some of those issues where the background will be blurred out, and you'll see the blur kind of transfer over into like the side of the character's head if it's like closing in on the background, or like if the background's here and the eyelash is right here and the eyelash kind of fades into the background, so it just sort of blurs the eyelash a little bit and kind of blurs the side of their face. It's like what the fuck is going on here? And that's not like the biggest issue in the world. All of these small minor things I don't really mind. At times you'll see a character talking and they're like overly emotional about something, and then like 2 seconds after being completely emotional, their face just wipes into this flat state right before the shot transfers over, and you see, it transitions over to a new character speaking. You see the other character, and it's like, it feels like that split second that the camera was on the character who was all emotional, it was on them for like a split second too long before the character went back to their kind of standard state. But overall, man, I do think that this game is fucking beautiful, and it has really solid art direction as well. The lighting is impeccable. I think that it just leans into a cosmic horror. It'll be this cinematic shot of a character walking through a corridor, and there's like blood droplets that are suspended in the air, with the zero gravity. And it's like, it's just this, it's telling you that something bad is about to take place, or something bad just took place, and you're walking into something that you don't want to see. And I don't know, it's thematically appropriate, tonally excellent. Like, I think they do a lot of really, really solid work there. And I think the soundtrack as well is god tier. A great soundtrack that, this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, and I guess it is, but at times, they cut to these end of episode moments, and you're sitting there in the title screen before booting into the next episode, and these dope ass songs are playing, and you're like, it almost feels like these songs have a little bit too much, a little too much swagger to be associated with this game. And once again, like, the game is not bad, and I'm not trying to imply that, but it's just these songs hit on a totally different level than anything that the game hit on. And like, they have the same exact Portishead song that was in Mixtape that I was praising in Mixtape. It's the same exact song in Directive 8020, and obviously neither developer would have had any idea that the other one was using that song in the game. But I was just like, holy fucking shit, there's a song from the Viagra Boys in Directive 8020 that, what they called it, I wrote it down here. The Cognitive Trade-Off Hypothesis is the name of the Viagra Boy song. Look that shit up. That shit goes so damn hard. And as I'm sitting here talking about a game that I just don't think has really any standout character moments or any standout writing per se, and it's like, how does the soundtrack have so much swagger in a game that has very little? But yeah, man, I mean, once again, all the praise in the world to the soundtrack, all the praise in the world to the visuals for the most part, other than a few inconsistencies that we talked about. But like, I do think that the camera work on offer throughout Directive 8020 is excellent. Sometimes they'll zoom in like super fucking close during these cinematic shots, or even sometimes during gameplay, and you'll walk through and be completely unaware of what is in the room and what is surrounding you, not really able to see anything because the camera's panned in so close to the back of your character. And like, that just elicits all of those, when we talk about the PlayStation 1 era of the fixed cameras and not being able to see what is in the room because of the limited perspective, and the horror that would intensify and all the tension that would come along with not really seeing what is in front of you. They do a really good job. They don't do it often, but they do a good job a few times throughout the game of making you feel that sense of dread of like, I have no idea what is in this room with me. But overall, when trying to find a score talking about the Tekken art specifically, I mean, it was pretty damn impressive, dude. I would throw an 8 out of 10 for the score on Tekken Art. But now all we have to do is go through this and add up the scores and divide them by 4. So we got a 7 out of 10 for the gut check, 6 out of 10 for the story, 7 out of 10 for the gameplay, and an 8 out of 10 for the tech and the art. Okay, yeah, so overall you're talking about a flat 7 out of 10 for Directive 8020, which I think that when we were beginning the review, that's kind of right where I was leaning. This feels somewhere closer, like this is definitely better than Man of Medan, which I would probably give a 6 out of 10, somewhere in that range, to Man of Medan. And I think this maybe would be a little bit lower than something like House of Ashes, but would probably be a little bit higher than something like Devil in Me. Once again, I'd have to really sit down and think more about those games before ranking them. But yeah, 7 out of 10. And now we got to apply our star rating here on the old backlogged system. So a 3 out of 5 would be 60%, and a 3.5 would be 70 flat, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, yeah, it's 70%. Not the brightest in the world. So yeah, there we go. 3.5 out of 5 is the final score for Directive 8020. Not a bad game, not a great game, just a game. You know, it kind of, my overall feeling is that it's on the more boring end. And I think that they made some decisions that I don't quite understand, leaning that heavily into the stealth department. But, you know, definitely not a bad game whatsoever. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you have played the old Directive 8020, how are you feeling about it currently? If you're a fan of the Dark Pictures universe, where is your ranking? How would you rank your like top 5 supermassive games, even including Until Dawn and The Quarry? I'd be really curious to hear that. So I'm pumped to see what they do next. And that information is kind of out there and available if you want to go and check that out. It's a little spoiler-ish, I guess. Not really, but it's they do those teasers at the... Anywho, we ain't even got to get into that. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. If you want to support the channel on Patreon or through the YouTube membership program, both of those options are available. Check the links in the description to do so. And shout out to Captain Corndog, Vin, and Sadik for supporting the channel at that shout out tier. And yeah, man, appreciate y'all. Hope y'all are enjoying the game if you are checking it out. And yeah, Lego Batman coming up very soon. I'll be diving into that in 007 First Light. Look out for a review for both of those games on the channel. And until next time, guys, I shall see you very soon. Goodbye.